further ado, I'm going to introduce, his name is John Thomas Littell. He's a medical doctor. He's a board-certified family physician. After earning his MD from George Washington University, he served in the Army, receiving Emeritus Service Medal for his work in quality improvement, and also served with the National Health Service Corps in Montana. During his years, he served in Kissimmee, Florida. Dr. Littell has served on the faculty of a number of medical schools, one of them being UCF School of Medicine. He's also has been the chief of staff at the Florida Hospital. He resides here in Ocala with his wife, and you have 5 children. 5 children. Yeah. Anybody has 5 children, you got to give them a hand just for that.
The wife.
At this time, and I'm going to give you a little bit more information about this. When I put this out on Facebook, I put an advertisement out on Facebook to get people to come. I've had numerous people call me, text me, and contact me and say, this man treated my loved one, and he either saved my loved one's life or he saved my life. And I've had numerous people come to me and tell me that. And that in itself is testimony of who this man is. This man is, I've never seen a heart of a medical doctor like I've seen of him. And I say that very sincerely because he has one objective, and that's to save lives. And that is something that in this world is hard to see. But I can say that, and I want to introduce you, if you would come at this time, Dr. John Littell.
I do, thank you. That's quite an introduction. My gosh. You got to save your energy for later. We got a great night ahead of us, but I want to thank you for that warm welcome, and you know, and again the prayer, Pastor. You know, we do all great things through God, and I don't heal nobody. God heals everybody. Sorry for the grammatical error, but that's true. God heals. I just help. As best I can. I try not to get in his way. And unfortunately, the medical profession of late has been getting in the way of a lot of great things that God's been trying to achieve in healthcare and in medicine. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to come out here. Before I push any button on this gizmo gadget, I forgot to tell the gentleman I'm a left-handed individual, so I'm likely to go the wrong direction. Do you want to make it real simple? Am I going to push to the right for the clicker? What can I look at over there? Yeah, we got it. It is that simple. Did you all get this pretest here, this COVID pretest? All right, I came up with that just yesterday. But before I do a little bit on that, I explained to Randy that what this evening is about is overcoming fear and ignorance and injecting hope and knowledge, not misinformation. All right, and that term, I talked to my wife, Kathleen, who's really just the most amazing mom, and would be here, but she's helping my 13-year-old with his studies. And that word is such a horrible word for our times. Where it came from, I don't know. Look it up. Why can't we just talk about education the way we should and stop this nonsense about misinformation? You're either telling the truth or you're lying. And I come to you to tell you the truth. And I know it's the truth because guess what? It's what I see every day in my office. I'm basically, why I have this white coat on is because when I put on this white coat, I know that I'm projecting a sense of hope and healing. And more importantly, I'm asking the Lord to give me what I need to bring hope into the lives of the people whom I meet each day and to heal them. That's why we wear white coats. That's why the medical students in the back were so honored when they got into medical school to go through a white coat ceremony. And I was able to put a white coat on my eldest daughter, who's now working for me in my practice in Kissimmee. You know, and the pre-med students. You know, we have a pre-medical student here tonight who was denied entry into medical school last year because she did not want to subject herself to an injection that she knew nothing about, and she did not know how it might affect her ability down the road to have children or her health care. So the medical school made a decision to say, sorry, we don't want you. Well, I got news for that medical school and any other medical school that has that policy. If you have that policy forcing people to put experimental substances into their bodies, then you have no business teaching medical students. You're not producing doctors and physicians. You're producing robots who have a narrative. You're teaching them a narrative, and just as somebody here said recently, that we expect our doctors to be lockstep with us in terms of how we manage patients. And I heard that word lockstep, and I'm a historian, a military historian. I don't write books, but I read books about military history. I was proud to serve in the Army, along with my wife, who was an Army nurse. And we all know what that term lockstep means. It's what happened 70 years ago in Germany, when the doctors in Germany were told, you either line up with us, lockstep with how we handle the Jewish problem, or you get out of Germany, or worse. So physicians of America need to stop marching lockstep in beat and time with the hospitals, with the FDA, with the CDC, with the government and the other bureaucracies, the insurance companies. We have to stop. Now, I get emotional because that's how God made me. But I'm a little more emotional tonight because I've been working 24/7, 365 for many years now, not just with COVID. But with COVID, it's been particularly challenging because of the phone calls in the middle of the night from husbands and wives and loved ones. Is my loved one going to die? They have a fever now, they're having breathing problems, or they're in a hospital where I hadn't been able to take care of them. And unlike many of the experts, and there are very many friends of mine out there that you should be following, right, on social media that know a lot about COVID, I dare say I'm probably the only one that's been writing the death certificates for people who actually die from COVID, and also people who've died in the hospital from other conditions besides COVID, but who had COVID on their death certificates. But yes, people died from COVID, including my best friend of 20 years. And that's when the Delta variant hit. And I can't talk about that. I can talk about it now without crying, but it took a long time. And that was a time when we all had to learn how to treat. And so the reason we're all here tonight, and the reason physicians from around the world have been gathering in Pittsburgh, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, in Rome, in Pensacola next week, eventually here in Ocala, is because we're exchanging ideas freely. Ideas that you're going to hear about tonight. Ideas which will save lives. Not the ideas that are being driven into our brains by insurance companies. This letter that I got just a week ago from Florida Blue, in which it said, after a recent review, this is Dr. John Littell, we've noticed an increase in the number of prescriptions and the total of number of doses being dispensed for ivermectin. You are identified as one of the physicians whose prescribing patterns, as compared to your peers, will necessitate a quality audit. Now, a quality audit in insurance terms is the first step towards potentially being decredentialed, in this case with Blue Cross Blue Shield. Those same quality audits are being conducted at hospitals. They're being conducted by recertification boards like the American Board of Family Medicine, Pediatrics, and Internal Medicine. In other words, my decision to choose to use a medication, which I'll talk about briefly, that has in fact saved lives, I've treated my own family members, may eventually lead me to being drummed out of the medical profession. That can happen. It is happening. It is happening. So this is a call for public action tonight. It is a call for all of you to realize that some of the stuff I wrote in this book, and I'm not coming here to sell this book. If you want it, it's in my office downtown. But I wrote this book, started writing this book 25 years ago. It's called The Hidden Truth, Deception in Women's Healthcare. And I started seeing over 25 years ago how many of the things that were happening in my practice of women's healthcare, and I delivered babies for over 25 years, not just with delivering babies, but with some of the things that were out there, I said, this isn't making sense. And women would come to me and say, I don't feel right taking these substances. And I would go to conferences and I would ask questions, as you'll see if you get the book, and the answer from the podium with 300-400 doctors in attendance, when I asked about the potential dangers of some of these things I was prescribing for women, one of the answers in Orlando, Florida was, Dr. Littell, let's keep that to ourselves. In front of 400 physicians, the physician who was from Columbia University. And he said, if we talk about it in a negative way, women will start to stop using those substances. Let me give you one glaring example, and then I'll move on to COVID. There was a device produced by a pharmaceutical company about 12 years ago that was a permanently sterilizing device for women. They flocked to it. It was easy. It was all the doctor had to do, and many in this town did it, was slide a couple of rods up the fallopian tubes of the women after they had their baby. These pseudo-metallic rods then ensured that there was no way that woman would ever get pregnant, and it was presumably less dangerous than a tubal ligation or sterilization. It was certainly a lot easier and a lot more profitable with regards to the amount of time it took for the physicians to do this procedure. That procedure was in place for over 10 years. Thousands of women had perforations of their fallopian tubes, unnecessary hysterectomies, bled to death, and it took people like Erin Brockovich, if you remember that movie, to point out that women were being abused by the medical profession. So what did the FDA, which had approved this device, do 4 years ago? They said to every OB doctor in the country, okay guys, we got it wrong the first time, sorry, our bad. Instead, we have you print out a 20-page pamphlet to give to every woman about all the things that can go wrong. And let's try that for a while and see how it works. Well, guess what? After 6 months, they realized that no doctor was giving it and no woman was reading it. And they finally took it off the market with no lawsuits against eShore. My point in the reason I bring that up, it should be obvious. If you trust the Food and Drug Administration to make any decisions on the behalf of your wives, your children, yourself, then you are grossly being misinformed by the FDA. And frankly, let's say it as it is, we've been lied to. We've been lied to by the CDC and by the FDA over and over and over again in my 30-plus years in medicine. I'm privileged to be an independent practitioner, thank goodness, but the friends of mine who are now working for hospitals would love to be up here saying the same thing. But they have mouths to feed, they have lives to lead, and they have patients to take care of. And so they're doing a lot of this stuff. There's a physician up in Congress I know very well who's been writing for ivermectin for over 200 members of Congress and their staffs. But he can't make that public knowledge, or he could well be drummed out of Congress, certainly out of the medical profession. So hopefully that gives you a little taste. So now we're going to move on to the meat, the science, and I promise we're not going to go real long because I'm excited to get questions tonight. I'm an old school teacher. Before I became a doctor, by the way, I think it's a worthwhile story to tell. I've been wanting to be a doctor since I was 6 years old. I wanted to be a doctor, a priest, and commander-in-chief of the armed forces when I was 6. I got close. Anyway, I got close. I'm thankful to be a doctor. You know, no one in my family had been a doctor. None of my parents didn't graduate college, and so I fought like heck. And my first essays for medical school, after going to Cornell, I said things like, most doctors I know are not taking the Hippocratic Oath. I was 21 years old at the time. I said, most doctors I'm finding are taking a hypocritical oath. I wrote that for my essays for medical school. I don't think any of the ladies back there who went to medical school wrote that. I found the doctor who I went driving around with, and for a day with the doctor, he drove up to the train station and said, every day I'm glad I don't have to get on the Long Island Railroad and go into the city. I get to go to my office. And I said, well, you know, that's what my relatives do. Why are you putting them down? I'm thinking that self. Why are you putting them down? So I did not like the attitude of many doctors. So it took me a while to get into medical school, and I got to do a lot of great things. I got to learn how to drive trucks. I scooped ice cream cones at Friendly's. I wrote technical abstracts. I waited tables at Reedy's Irish Cafe in Manhattan while I went to Columbia University to further my education in, of all things, DNA and protein chemistry. and stuff that's coming in very handy today. And then finally, when I got accepted to George Washington after a year of teaching high school biology, I couldn't afford to go there. So my mentor growing up, who was a Catholic priest and a military chaplain, said, Johnny, the only guy who calls me Johnny except my mom, Johnny, you need to go in the military. And I did, and God wrote the rest of my plan for me. So here I am to tell you a little bit about COVID. Now the pre-test is really going to help us a lot. Do you all have that there? Now let's look at this first question. All right? Let's talk about the available Pfizer and Moderna and J&J injections. By a show of hands, true, how many of you believe it's true that these are actual vaccines? Show of hands, no peer pressure if you don't, okay. The answer is false. And I'll give you the reason for it right now. Because a traditional vaccine, if you go back to one of my videos on YouTube where I talked about Edward Jenner and smallpox and George Washington and how he won in the Battle of Princeton because he knew what to do. It's a fascinating history, but the reality is you take a part of the weakened virus and you put it in our bodies and you allow our bodies to have a natural immune response. What this technology has done is it is taking the cell lines. Now, think about this for those of you who might be bothered by this. When they talk about aborted fetuses, you have to remember that they didn't take a dead baby's cells to start these cell lines. They had to have a living, breathing baby that was aborted. So think about that. That's why these cell lines are so valuable. They were able to induce abortions in women on at least 3 occasions back in the 1960s, keep those babies alive enough to get the cell lines to propagate, and to this day they've been propagated and utilized for all of these vaccines, not just the ones we're getting now, but many of the childhood vaccines. Now, the question is, are we aborting babies now? No, we're not. Those baby cell lines are there. Unfortunately, we never knew the names of those babies. We never knew even what kind of DNA they had. We don't know anything about them. But we do know that that DNA is what has been used to encode the messenger RNA, which is then put into all of our bodies to then instruct our bodies to produce the spike protein at who knows how many millions of copies, and then hope and pray that our bodies are healthy enough to produce the antibodies in the ribosomes that will then fight the spike protein. So look at all those steps. All those steps. None of that is what a vaccine has ever done or ever should do. And yet we've been calling it a vaccine. It's genetic engineering, which is why when I write medical exemptions for people all over the country, I refer to GINA, which is an acronym for the Genetic Engineering Act, I don't know what that said, that no American citizen should be forced to put the products of genetic engineering into their body. Period, end of story. It is genetic engineering. If you really want a source that can tell you what it is, go to Dr. Robert Malone, with whom I spent 2 days, and he's the founder of messenger RNA vaccine technology. Should be receiving the Nobel Prize for this, but won't because he has a different view than the others who've been marketing it. So let's move on. COVID vaccines prevent the transmission of COVID from one person to another. Who thinks that true? Show of hands for true. We all thought that was the case. After all, I have a credit for the NBA right now. I have a 13-year-old son, I had 4 daughters, never spent this kind of money to go to sporting events, and actually, after last year, I didn't want to spend any more money. But I have a huge credit from 2 years ago for the Orlando Magic. I won't tell you how much, but it was a heck of a lot of money because it was a big surprise for my son Thomas, but then they shut it all down. So I get a call from the marketing guy saying, Dr. Littell, you can go to a Lakers game and you can sit in the front row with your whole family against the Magic. Wow, now first of all, we want to talk about LeBron, but hey, God bless LeBron James. What did he say? Every NBA ball player should have the right to refuse a vaccine. Yeah, he was a little bit mixed up last year, but he said the right thing now. So I said, first row, that'll be fine. We're all going to show up there. He said, okay, just make sure you bring your vaccine passport. your vaccine card. I said, whoa, wait, what? What do you mean? He said, no, Dr. Littell, no, the first 3 rows at every Orlando Magic game, you have to be vaccinated. But if you want to sit in the 4th row, it's fine. And you can do whatever you want. You can go get all the free beer and all the food it's pretty cool. But, okay, so what is this? So in the first 3 rows, all these vaccinated people can't transmit COVID? What? When I'm taking care of sick COVID patients, next question, which I already gave you the answer, nah, it does not prevent sickness. I've been taking care of more vaccinated patients with COVID in the last 2 weeks than I have unvaccinated patients with COVID, including one gentleman, I didn't even know he had been vaccinated. He landed up in the hospital, and his family asked me to take over his hospital care right here. And I got him out on oxygen and ivermectin, all these medications. And now the family's like celebrating and said to me, hey, do you think he needs to get a booster shot? I said, booster? What do you mean? Well, he said, he already got his first 2. I said, when did he get his first 2? Oh, back in April. I said, the hospital didn't even have that in there. The hospital, which was telling everybody that 100% of their patients who were sick were unvaccinated, had this guy in the COVID unit as unvaccinated. You know, what kind of is that? And nobody had to bleep that. I bleep myself. I got 5 kids. Good Catholic family. Anyway, so that's what's happening. People are being deluded into thinking that we unvaccinated masses are a threat to all those healthy vaccinated people. What a load. All right, so that's us. By show of hands, how many people here believe that asymptomatic, unvaccinated persons are transmitting COVID to other people? Show of hands. You are so educated. You are so educated. You've been watching the right stuff. Man of Shevis. We're not a threat. We're not a threat. But go back to my YouTube video from over a year ago, last May, where I said the same thing before vaccines. Asymptomatic people are not a threat. Asymptomatic transmission was a means of locking us down. It was a means of keeping us out of our houses of worship. It was a means of destroying families and schools and society and medicine and our culture as Americans. We had to stop it. It was terrible. It was terrible. So we were fearful. We were fearful as Americans. And we have to overcome that right now. I went to a meeting, well, let's talk about that. I went to a meeting the other day, go back for a second, of doctors in Orlando. It's a group of physicians I've worked with for 10 years. And when I went in there was a dinner meeting, and they were all sitting around tables, and I was the only one without a mask. I walk into this hotel with a meeting, and everyone's sitting at a table with their meals, with their masks on, like pulling them down. These are physicians in Orlando, Florida, eating with their dang and having conversations and being up to the microphone with their mask on. And then finally, so I sit down and I eat, and halfway through the meal, the lovely young pediatrician across from me, her mask comes off. And then the doctor over there, his mask comes off. And then the doctor over there. By the end of the meeting, half of them had their masks off. What does that tell you about society if physicians are afraid to take the masks off in front of other physicians? We have lost our spines as in society and as physicians. And frankly, I think we've lost our brains in society. So they actually, when I left the meeting, I think they voted me off the board of directors. Afterwards, I got a text, we're going to find a new position for you on the board. Anyway, that's what happens. So here you go, testing. I could talk a lot about testing. One of my most watched videos, and I wasn't in this to do videos, I don't even get me started on that. There was a doctor at this conference, a layperson in San Juan, Puerto Rico, I'd like you all to pay attention to something called the Rome Declaration. It came out of this Global COVID Summit. So all you have to do is remember, Global COVID Summit. So I had this idea of calling this meeting a summit, and I had this idea of drafting a declaration, and I invited other doctors to help me, and now we've got, as of yesterday, over 10,000 physicians and scientists only signed onto this declaration, which is a freedom act for physicians to take care of patients and patients to be taken care of according to the Hippocratic tradition of first do no harm, and to be able to treat the way we should really be able to treat our patients. It's a great document. It's a great document. But at the meeting in San Juan, and you'll see this on the video that accompanied, they didn't get me on the video a lot, and that's fine. I really wanted the video to be Dr. Ryan Cole, Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. Pierre Corey, Dr. Richard Urso. They're the scientists. I'm the doc who takes care of patients, but these guys explain the science. But the one guy that stood up and said, hey, you're criticizing Big Pharma and insurance, they're making money, but you're making money. You're making money. And I cut him off. By the way, this guy was a Uber billionaire. I didn't realize until later. Not a millionaire, but Uber. And he was going to donate money to our cause. I'll give you to our cause. So I said, whoa, time out. I said, there's not a doctor on this panel that wants to see another patient with COVID ever. We want to disappear. I want to go back to being the doctor I was. I want to take care of all my patients who have needs beyond COVID. You know, depression, anxiety, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, whatever. COVID has 50% more of my energy has been on COVID. We want it to go away. For this guy to incriminate. So after the meeting, he came up to me and he said, good job. He was just being a devil's advocate, and he did a great job. So he gave a lot of money to our cause so the doctors can get around the country and spread this truth. I don't get the money, but they pay for my travel. That's all I need. Pay for my airfare. So let's talk about testing. People watch this video, and I said, why testing positive for COVID is not bad news. I actually wanted to say why it's good news back in the day, but it's not bad news. And the reason is these PCR tests, the question I have to ask you, this one you may not know the answer to. Does the PCR test for COVID yield less false positives than the rapid antigen test that you can buy at Walmart or CVS? If you think that's true, raise your hands. And it's okay if you do. It's okay if you do, because I didn't know the answer until I went to Puerto Rico 2 weeks ago. I didn't know. I just knew that there were a whole lot of false positives. I didn't know the difference. The reality is the PCR test yields a boatload of false positives. A boatload, which is why no child should be tested, period. But especially in children, those PCR tests are cross-reacting with other cold viruses. They're useless. Testing in general is useless. But if you had to get something done and you needed to go because you wanted to go see the 18-year-old kid who wants to go visit grandma, just do the rapid antigen test at CVS. It's got way less false positives, okay? It's not as sensitive. It won't have all the true positives, but it won't give you the number of false positives. And we can go on and on about why false positives destroyed our country, destroyed people's careers. People couldn't go to work because they kept testing positive. I had a guy, you can read this question while I tell you. I had a gentleman in the hospital, my first patient that I was able to take care of in the hospital, who's actually here tonight, and they would not let him leave the hospital until he tested negative. And he was fine. He needed to get out of there. He'd been there a month. He was getting clinically depressed. I was yelling and screaming at the administrator. I said, what are you waiting for God's sake? The guy's no longer contagious. I had arguments and finally had a negative test. But the things we do with these false positive tests, it's just insane. Natural immunity, I love this one. I could do a whole night on natural immunity. But here's the question, folks. Natural immunity, I had COVID back in February. So the question to you, did my natural immunity to COVID expire in August? If you think so, raise your hand. There you go, come back. The answer is no, and thank goodness, a study out of Finland. You gotta love some of these Scandinavian countries. You just gotta love them. They're kind of borderline socialist, but they have these patient registries. Finland is amazing. They can keep track of every person in their country's healthcare record all the time in Finland. So they know when they publish a study, they're getting it right on with no influence from the pharmaceutical industry or the insurance industry. And that study just looked at 1,000 people and showed that after 13 months, they were still, it wasn't the end of it, but at the end of it that they could study, 13 months, still producing antibodies if they'd had natural COVID infection. And that doesn't even talk about what's in the bone marrow, the T-cell immunity, the memory cells that go on and on and on. So I'm here to tell you tonight, as I told many of my patients today, My immunity, having had COVID in February, is far superior to your immunity, having had Pfizer or Moderna in February or March or April or May. Because you've all heard that the Pfizer, those immunities expired after whatever immunity they had, 6 months. And by the way, the booster shot is nothing different. It is not a shot for the variant. It's the same old shot for the Alpha variant, which is come and gone. Next question. I'll kind of get through these because this is the meat of the talk. All right. Masks in children. One of the arguments that some of the folks use to put masks on children, by the way, I was at Dunkin' Donuts, so little, 5 and 6 year old here with masks. You're seeing it still. Our own diocese in Orlando for the Catholic schools is still mandating that children wear masks in the schools still, with a positivity rate that's less than 8% in the state. We're seeing that. So the question is, are masks at all harmful to children? Yes. And we know why. One of the physicians that was with me, and again, if you watch the video, Mark McDonald, he's a child psychiatrist from California. And I see a lot of kids too. I never saw 10-year-olds with depression, by the way, until COVID hit. 10-year-old, I'll tell you exactly the scenario, not to do with masks. Both single-parent families that could not go to school because the mother had to go to work, right? And the child was afraid to go to school, and the neighbor's kids were afraid to play with the kid because this was the time the kids couldn't play with each other. So these children had to stay home by themselves for months on end while their father was or their mother was at work. That's a recipe for depression. Mark McDonald talked about studies on babies who have been born in the last 3 years. They do IQ tests. This was out of Johns Hopkins. The children across America, when they started sampling in those 3 years, had a 20-point decline in IQ testing if they've been born in the last 2 years. They measured 6 months, and the reason, as Dr. McDonald states, is the lack of social interaction with people, not seeing their faces. They're going. I saw this. We saw this. You see mothers with their babies in strollers with their masks on. Okay, so that's nonsense. We're done with the mask. Children are more likely to benefit than to be harmed by COVID vaccines. How many of you think COVID vaccines are more likely to benefit them than to harm them? You know the answer right now. The answer is they are not more beneficial. There's a great study, I was trying to find it, that showed in children under the age of 18, the adverse events from these vaccines were twice as great as the number of children who got sick enough from COVID to be in the hospital. All right? Now, remind you, I'm saying kids got sick from COVID. My 13-year-old was sick from COVID at the same time I was. I'm not giving him a vaccine to get over a cold. Not this vaccine, not this injection, not any vaccine, frankly. If they had a vaccine against a common cold, I would not give it to my 13-year-old or any kid. But this particular injection actually led to the demise of more children in this country than were saved from being hospitalized. I'm not even talking about deaths, hospitalized. Twice as many got myocarditis or other forms of sudden death. And just look it up. It's out there. You won't find it on Google. All right. Effective early treatments. This one, all right, true or false? All right. There are no effective early treatment regimens for COVID. False. Now, why I put that out there is that there's a hospital system down in Orlando, and I'll name it because whatever, this won't be on YouTube tomorrow or Facebook anyway, called Orlando Health, which employs a whole lot of doctors. Not me. All right, I don't even have privileges there, so I can say this. But they sent a memo out to all their physicians as recently as August, when we were in the middle of the Delta variant crisis. In August, they told all of their employed physicians, right on the front sentence, there are no effective early outpatient treatments for COVID, period. And then they went on to say, if you are found writing for ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, blank, 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 okay? You run the risk of being, and one of those people who's been doing that is a very close friend of mine who sold his practice. He's now in his 70s, and he's rescuing lives with ivermectin. They sent him a letter. He said, John, if they kick me out, they kick me out. I mean, whatever. But it's just an interesting thing. Actually, if it happens to him, there'll be an army of lawyers at his side because he was my mentor, and in my opinion, the greatest family doctor in the state of Florida. So it ain't happening to him. All right, but I'll keep you posted if it does, because we got to raise up an army. Got to raise up an army. Now here's a good one. The new oral drug, molnupiravir. Any of you heard about molnupiravir? Produced by that great ethical pharmaceutical giant Merck. If you want to know more about Merck, read my book. They're horrendous. I kicked those drug reps out of my office 15 years ago. Anyway, that's more effective than ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine at preventing hospitalization and death from COVID. Do you think it's more effective? No. And you're going to see why in just a second. All right, I think we got through all those questions. There's a 10th question. I put in there for jokes about what could happen to doctors. You can look at it if you can read it later about what they're doing to physicians who are talking like I'm talking. But you can just look at that later. So this is actually from a talk that I give. It's just one slide. I give this to couples who are preparing for marriage, of all things, based on my book. But I decided to throw this in as the very first slide. Modern medicine's cure for every ailment. Vaccinate, medicate, operate, but rarely, if ever, educate. All right? That's modern medicine. That's why the students, they get lectures, and they get various things, right, thrown at them. But education, educare, comes from this Latin word bringing out the person, bringing from within, educing from within, that Socratic method. Philosophy. I was fortunate enough to study philosophy at Cornell, and again a year in seminary. So what are the two things that I find missing most in healthcare nowadays, in the field of philosophy? Number one is medical ethics, and on the other end you have logic. There's no syllogistic reasoning anymore in medicine. They'll tell you that A equals B, and then they'll tell you that B equals C, but you can't figure out that A equals C. That's called syllogistic reasoning. They aren't getting people to think creatively that way, and certainly not ethically, and challenging them. So education, but it's that lockstep mentality. Here's a vaccine, give the vaccine. Here's a medication, prescribe the medication. Here's a new surgery, do the surgery. Stick the Easter tubes up the fallopian tubes, and don't care about the ethical consequences, and don't even do the logic behind, hey, is there a possibility that if I put these rods in these fallopian tubes, they may perforate, and then the woman may have a hysterectomy or bleed to death and die? No syllogistic, no reasoning. Just do it. Actually, just do it usually is a good thing. In this case, it's a bad thing in medicine. We shouldn't just do anything. So now what we're about, and I've used these slides in a couple other talks, but I'm about restoring the integrity of the medical profession. And that starts with not blaming people who've chosen not to get vaccinated, and stop being prejudicial towards people who have made informed choices, right? Honestly, I see that in the doctor's lounges. When they see me coming now, they all whisper. But before they didn't whisper. They didn't used to whisper at Ocala Regional and Abbott Health, but now it comes, I just get kind of glances and dirty looks sometimes. But the point is, they've been taken, in August, they were swamped with patients. And these unvaccinated people did come in. And guess what? They died. My best friend died. I had him on blood thinners when he went in the hospital. He gets in the ICU, and the pulmonologist says, hey, guess what? His D-dimer, which is a measure of blood thing, it's fine. Let's take him off that. I didn't know. 2 days later, I go to visit him. His D-dimer is in the 20s. He's getting hypoxic again. They put him on remdesivir at the same time. Now, because he was my best friend, I chose not, I could have done more, but I chose to trust. This is the beginning of the Delta variant. I said, he'll be okay. No, he didn't. He said, John, this thing's taken over my body. And I was, I can't talk about it more. But the reality is, these so-and-sos who have the audacity to blame the unvaccinated for their deaths when they were sheer lazy bums who could have taken a little bit of time to study about the pathophysiology and the pharmacology, the treatment of COVID. They could have spent a little extra time. I'm sorry to call them bums. That's bad. That's bad. They work hard. They're a product of a system which has not encouraged critical thinking. That's what they are. So forgive me, Lord, for saying that. I am sorry, because I truly am sorry. Because I wrote a book about that. These obstetricians are good people. They want to take care of you. These future doctors want to take care of you. Because they've been misinformed doesn't mean that they're dumb or they're stupid or they're sinister. What's sinister is the people who are training them, who should be educating them instead of training them to be robots. They should be educating. That's what's sinister. So let's change that. Let's restore the integrity. Let's remember why we became physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists. I had a nurse yesterday in the ward, young nurse right out of training. Oh, she was so sweet. I love the young nurses. Oh, man. To me, for COVID, they were the most amazing resource we had were the nurses and the respiratory therapists, because they would listen to me. They take me aside. And this nurse yesterday says, Dr. Littell, are you the doctor writing for ivermectin for this patient, who, by the way, belongs to this great congregation here? And I said, yeah. He said, that is so refreshing. And I said, thank you. Thank you for saying that. And she was so sincere, because she said no one else is doing that, okay? So why she became a nurse was evident to me. Why the respiratory therapists and all of us are in medicine. And we're in medicine to do no harm. That's why we doctors in San Juan started and drafted that declaration. The first Hippocratic principle, primum non nocere, to do no harm. So if I have a choice between using medications which have been used for decades with a safe record versus something that's just been rushed through, that's been pushed to us, as I said earlier, by these industries, of course, I'm going to choose the thing I find least harmful. And again, this principle of informed consent, which sometimes in the eyes of the pharmaceutical industry does mean getting a 20-page pamphlet that you have to read cover to cover to give informed consent. If they had given informed consent about remdesivir in the hospitals, nobody would have ever had it. It was never an option for a patient not to get remdesivir. Infectious disease consult, remdesivir. I sat down with a pulmonologist in this town last week who's been doing this stuff for a year and a half. I said, and I was kind of being critical to him. He didn't want to do ivermectin. I said, but you've been doing remdesivir. Oh, he said, no, I never did remdesivir. It was too experimental. I said, whoa, back up. I said, but you're on the cases. You've been managing these patients. Well, I said, infectious disease did that. Well, you're the pulmonary doc. You're taking care of the same patient. Isn't it your goal to get the patient home? Are you going to sit there and let someone else experiment with your patient? You know, why don't you have a conversation about it? At the very minimum, have a conversation with the patient and his family. So here's a little thing I just wanted to show you. I have no idea. I'm talking a whole long time, and I'm sorry. I'm not going to go much longer. I want questions. But this is important. The other day when someone did they get the approval for 5 to 12-year-olds already for these vaccines? They're getting really close. So I'm watching this guy. I'm in the doctor's lounge at Ocala Regional, and I see this guy come on the TV, Dr. Bornstein. And right there, underneath his name, it says Board of Directors, Pfizer. And he's on Good Morning America talking about how wonderful these vaccines are going to be for your children. And I'm saying, it says former commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration and member board of directors of Pfizer, and he's the expert doctor on whatever the heck it was, telling parents of America to vaccinate their children with the Pfizer vaccine. And that's who you're going to listen to? That's education? Or is that misinformation? You know, so here's the drug, that Merck. Now Merck, by the way, tried to come up with a vaccine and failed. So they put their money behind Johnson & Johnson, and they waited for this drug to come out. Molnu, which, if you've been looking online, is truly, in East Indian dialect, a word for money. Molnu. Money Piravir. And you can't make this kind of stuff up, just like you couldn't make up luciferase and other things. But Molnupiravir is what does it say there? 50% cuts the risk of hospitalization or death. Whoa, big whoop, 50%. Well, we had studies going back, and I know this is too hard to read, on ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, going back to the Trump White House, that showed 75 to 80% reductions in deaths and hospitalizations with hydroxychloroquine, and the same now with ivermectin. But no, we can't use those drugs because they're dangerous. They're dangerous, but this molnupiravir is going to be the safe thing for everybody. This is what happened in India. I hope you all, this is a good slide. I'm glad I was able to learn how to snip and paste or whatever they call this. But this is out of India. Do you all know that, what's the population of India? Anyone want to guess? Over 1 billion, right? 1 point something billion. They have one state in India, the state of Uttar Pradesh, 240 million people in one state. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that amazing? I shared this at another meeting. I was fortunate enough to be on a call with the Indian American physicians around the country back before Delta variant, no, when the Delta variant hit India. And the purpose of the call was to figure out what to do to help India. And everybody on the call was talking about how to send oxygen compressors to India, send oxygen to India. And they succeeded, but there were people behind the scenes on the little chat section of this Zoom call, and I said, I get on, and I say, on the call, what about ivermectin? Why are you not using ivermectin in India? It's so easy to get. And they went right back into oxygen. Well, the next thing you know, in the chat section on Zoom, if any of you have ever done this, I get all these comments. You tell them, Dr. Littell, you're right. Ivermectin, very, very good, very good. Ivermectin, it's great. And then I said on the chat, I couldn't say this, they don't want to listen. I said, why aren't you guys talking about this now? He said, because in India, it's like America. You have states like California and New York, and you have states like Florida and Texas. Uttar Pradesh, thanks be to God, is a state like Florida. We hope where Florida is going to eventually have the gumption to say you can't penalize doctors for writing ivermectin. Please, Governor DeSantis and Dr. Joe Ladapo, we need that. But in Uttar Pradesh, the Minister of Health instituted a program in the middle of the Delta variant where they gave ivermectin to every household. They went household to household. They used community resources to give the medications in any household that had a sick person or where there was a person with a sick person. And they all got it, and the rates went down lower than any state in India, and in a state where, get a load of this, only 5% of the population was ever vaccinated, versus another state, Kerala, where they had 25% of the population vaccinated, and they got nowhere near the drop because they continued to do the same old thing, no ivermectin. So this is now more the medical stuff. I want to talk more about what we're going to do with the new variants. I put question mark variants. Bottom line is, when you treat COVID, look at the pathophysiology. Identify the people who are at most risk, not my 13-year-old son, not elite athletes in the NBA, not my godson who was in Afghanistan with the United States Army, right? We just call him, but he was forced to get the vaccine, right? If he wanted to get deployed, and he was so proud, he said, Uncle John, I'm going to Afghanistan, and he was not proud of that, mind you. He had to go to help get people out. That's another story, what happened over there, but he was going to be deployed, and he was proud of being deployed, but he said, guess what, I can't go unless I get vaccinated, get the shot. So he got the shot, and rather than run the embarrassment of never having got to do anything as an Army Ranger. All right, that's what they do in the military. So we're talking now about basic nutrition, preventive medications. Yes, you can use ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine to prevent, reducing. That's a busy slide. Most of you guys know about the Frontline Critical Care Coalition, Dr. Pierre Corey. Just go online. He's got protocols. He talks about how much ivermectin is doing. You know, I'm not going to talk to you all about it tonight. I know what it does. I took it myself. I talked to I have this pre-med student, right? She finally found a medical school that's hopefully willing to let her get in next year without receiving this injection. But she heard me with this friend of mine. I'm actually the godfather for his daughter who got COVID. And he called me. I was actually on vacation for the first time all year. I went to Montana for like 4 days to go to a wedding. And I'm in a grocery store in Montana. I got a call from Charlie. John, I'm sick. I can't move. 103 fever, body ache. I got COVID. Can you help me? I treated him aggressively with the ivermectin, all right? At the very same time, he was recovering over 2 weeks. He was very sick. I won't kid you. We all know, you all know how sick you get with COVID. But he did get better. His wife's brother, at the very same time, went out and got the vaccine. Perfectly healthy except for a hernia repair. 5 days after the vaccine, had a massive stroke and died. So she's going to her brother's funeral while her husband is home recovering from COVID. He came in today, and he's not a huggy guy, but he came and he said, "Give me a hug." And I gave him a hug, or he gave me a hug. And it was great, and I loved it, but the point was, I didn't even remember. You see, some of you came up earlier. I had a guy come up at church the other day and say, "I want to thank you for saving my life." First of all, you know what I said earlier, all right? I'm just helping. But after that, he said, "But not just my life, but my brother in North Carolina and his wife." You know, and I'm like, why did I have to do that? I mean, why is God asking for me to heal people or help heal people in North Carolina, not to mention the whole state of Florida? Because not enough physicians are willing to listen to the truth about ivermectin. So, I just have one more slide, and then we're going to get to the questions, all right? Maybe two. The blood thinners, I told you about my best friend. The biggest problem I've seen, all right? I tell a lot of stories. I'm Irish, what can I say? But this hand was very swollen about 3 weeks ago, and no one even in my family even noted. It was really swollen, and it was throbbing, and it was very painful. And why that happened was, again, another Ocala regional story, was because I had just come from the bedside of a man who was getting ready to go on a ventilator. The wife had called me to take over the care, and he had never been on an adequate dose of Lovenox, a blood thinner, to prevent the microclots, thromboses in his lungs. So I saw another pulmonary doctor in the doctor's lounge, and he's there with his nurse practitioner, and I said, I was fit to be tied, and I said, "Why haven't you guys had these people on blood thinners?" And he said to me, as nonchalant and calmly as possible, "I just haven't seen the evidence." And then I did this, and I won't do it now because I might break this thing, and I'm not that strong. But I took this hand, and I smacked it as hard as I could, and I know I broke my metacarpal, but anyway, and I just said something I shouldn't have said. I actually had to confess, but I said, when are you blanking doctors going to realize that the only evidence you need is that people are dying? That's all you needed, was the evidence that it wasn't working and people were dying. The unvaccinated died due to neglect in the hospital and due to the refusal by physicians in the community to give them effective early treatment, not because they were unvaccinated. I'm not going to be at a medical staff meeting for a long time now in the hospital. That's the end of the medical staff meetings. All right. No, I am chairman of family medicine at Advent Health, and it's very easy because I'm the only one that goes to the hospital. So I'm a chairman of one, essentially. But that's easy. I can fire myself. All right. So you gotta laugh. Make them laugh. Make them laugh. What is that? What movie is that from? Singing in the Rain. Everybody watch Singing in the Rain this weekend. We all need to do that. All right. These are all the drugs we're using to also fight COVID. It's not just ivermectin, and it's wonderful. You got doctors like Dr. Urso and Dr. McCullough and others. Hey, by the way, does anyone think these doctors are making extra money over this stuff? You know, I feel like I'm a therapist for these doctors around the country and that's kind of a lot of what I do in medicine. I'm looking at Dr. Miley here, who's been doing it his whole career. But because I say, guys, will you take care of yourselves? I worry about them. I know you all worry about me, but I worry about them. They have families, and they're researching until 2 in the morning. Dr. McCullough's got lawyers going after him left and right. He's been kicked off of more medical school faculties than you can imagine. Now the Board of Internal Medicine is saying they're going to take away his board certification. And he's not making money off of this stuff. Why did he bother? The most cited physician in the National Library of Congress is being threatened with the loss of his career and has not made a penny over anything he's doing. You think that tells you something about what's going on? So we're just trying to save lives, and that's what was said earlier. So home oxygen's another thing. Guys, please, if this comes to us again in this community, can I ask for the community to get its act together and get to the home oxygen companies and tell them to get their act together, because I am not going to have to lose another night's sleep worrying if my patient's going to have oxygen in their home in the United States of America. That does not make sense in this country. It might make sense in India, but not in America. And I can't tell you how many patients had to suffer at home for the lack of oxygen. Orlando was even worse. And I swear, I think it was a plot to kill unvaccinated people. Sorry if that sounds conspiratorial, but something was going on. Something was going on. When Apria and Lincare, I'm on the phone with both of them. And there's a very prominent person I was taking care of down there who's on our side. And he had to go, I would call them and they'd say, oh, we'll have the oxygen delivered tonight. And everyone in my entire staffs in two offices is calling. That night goes by, I'm calling the patient, he'll be there. Hey, but doc, my oxygen's at 85%. It's gonna be there, don't worry. And next day, no. Finally, we filed that PRIA, we called Lincare. My daughter, who's working for me now, just answering phones, says, oh, Dad, I found somebody. They're gonna deliver, Lincare, they're gonna deliver tonight. Night goes by, no oxygen. Another day, no oxygen. Finally, after 5 days of this blank, he goes out and buys himself an oxygen compressor, his own, which actually wasn't so expensive. But I would have done that at the beginning if I knew they were going to deny him oxygen. So, please, the monoclonal antibodies, thank you, Governor DeSantis. God bless Governor DeSantis. He needs all of our prayers every minute of every day. What he is doing is amazing for our country. It's miraculous for our state and for our country. And so when he said, I'm going to put monoclonal antibodies out there, where, by the way, you didn't have to go through a doctor's office or a hospital to get it. That was the trick. Being able to go to Wildwood and just get it. And then your wife, who's wasn't even sick, get it. It does this, and only this. When you are sick or just about to get sick, you get an infusion of these random antiviral antibodies just going to go after this virus, the spike protein to be specific, and help you. It's a help. It's a leg up. It's a leg up out of the hole, out of the pit. But it's not going to help you prevent, and it's not going to help if you wait too long when the inflammation and the thrombosis is happening. You got to get it early and along with the other stuff. All right, I'm done. You already heard me read my letter. This thing, by the way, was from the Walgreens pharmacy telling us that they wouldn't fill our prescriptions for ivermectin. It's a corporate policy. Rite Aid has the same policy. Again, Governor DeSantis, Dr. Ladapo, please come to our aid. So we're going to become, in the next, I tell you, the reason I'm doing this and possibly going other places is because we have to come together as a team. My biggest job as a physician is to get the other physicians, and I said this to all these doctors that you know, my role, as I see it, is to use my God-given talents and my military training to bring together a team of experts, subject matter experts, and to encourage each of them to check their egos at the door and come together to come up with a game plan, a strategic plan to save the lives of Americans and people around the world. And guess what? They're doing it. They're doing it all over the country. Doctors are sacrificing their egos. They said it could never be done, but it's happening. They are. So, but the hospitals have to help us. The pharmacies have to get with the program. These pharmacists, get out. There's a pharmacy in town where one of the pharmacists came up to me and said, I'm with you, Dr. Littell, but the head pharmacist is not. I'm sorry, she thinks you're a loser. So she's fighting. So underneath, she's prescribing, but she has to do it kind of surreptitiously. You know, it's crazy, this closet. The community doctors have to get their act together. The schools, the religious community has to stop telling kids to get vaccines and stop telling us it's our moral duty to get these injections. For crying out loud, I'm telling my Pope, wake up, Pope Francis, please. God bless you. I pray for you. I pray for my Pope because honestly, I am a proud Catholic, but I'm here to tell you that the devil is attacking my church. He's attacking our churches. He's attacking our country. This is spiritual warfare. And so, who do we call on when there's spiritual warfare? Better than any pastor in town is mom and dad. We need moms and dads to step up to the plate. You know what? The pandemic of fear targeted one group of people in this country, moms. It targeted the moms. So what is dad supposed to do when the mom's afraid? The dad's supposed to step up to the plate and protect the mom and protect the family, and the dads of America checked out during COVID. You know, I cannot believe to this day that they allowed their playgrounds to be roped off and didn't let their 2-year-olds swing on swings. Every one of my kids, the most favorite, hey, this tie, before I forget, was given to me on my 40th birthday, my very first day in Florida, as a physician, by my children. So I wear this every time. I just started, actually. So this is my tradition. When I'm talking about kids, I'm wearing Winnie the Pooh. And the point being that we have to swing our kids on swings. When they took the backboard, the hoops down off the backboards for my son couldn't go out and shoot hoops. There's something wrong with America. So please, folks, the time has come to bring back the good and the beautiful, and yes, the true in America. This is the truth from my heart to you, and I can tell things are going to happen because you guys have been listening. God bless you. Thank you for your time, and let's get some questions. Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to take just a few minutes. We're not going to take a lot. So if you have a question, if you would if you would start a line right behind this young lady here, and we're going to address this as fast as we can. Okay, so be prepared, get ready. There's going to be shotgun questions, okay?
You got it. And the reason they're shotgun is because at 8 o'clock, so I got 20 minutes, folks. I'm very sorry. I'm supposed to convene that meeting with all these doctors. It's a Zoom meeting. But go ahead, ask
Good evening, Dr. Littell. And I want you to know I pray for you every day. And I think of you and what you're going through, and I appreciate it because I have given your name to my friends too. So thank you. My question, and it's almost been answered by the way you told us that the other doctors are acting with not even together wearing their masks. But the issue I'm having, and I think I'd like to see us somehow come together as a community, is to find dentists, eye doctors, heart doctors that will bring us in. I haven't been to my eye doctor in a year and a half. I won't wear a mask to go in there because, frankly, I can't trust the judgment of a doctor who tells me I have to wear a mask just to come into his practice.
Thank you.
So if there's any way I can help on that, I'm bringing together.
You are going to help. You just helped immensely. Folks, challenge to the community, all right? There are some amazing people in this community. Ed Todd, who's a physician assistant, I'm not sure if he's here, and his wife. We are putting together a resource of all those, because a lot of those doctors are prescribing in the urgent care centers. So please, after this meeting, who's going to answer this up? I can't do it. Is someone going to help me? Or Ed's going to help, Ed Todd, and go to our local Republican Executive Committee, because I see some faces. We're going to get the doctors together in Marion County to support each other. Thank you. We will.
How many nurses are in the room? Can you just raise your hand? Nurses.
Whoa. Nurses, wow. That's great. Thank you.
How many doctors are in the room? How many doctors?
Oh, good, thank you, thank you.
This isn't my question. I didn't see you address number 6 on this, and it said deaths and injuries resulting from use of available COVID vaccines have been accurately determined by the CDC.
Thank you. And the answer is false. And the deaths from vaccines, you've all heard this. I'll share it. Maybe you haven't. So let's say what you may not have heard. If somebody comes in that has not completed the series of vaccines and then more than 2 weeks out from the completion of the series and has a stroke, has a heart attack, that is not a vaccine-related death, number one, even if you know that it is, pathophysiologically speaking. Number two, how many people that have had a vaccine are going to actually show up dead somewhere where someone's going to trace it back to the vaccine? Anywhere in medicine. So we know this much, and it's in my book. The vaccine adverse event reporting system should be criminal. It's not a reporting system. I tried doing it for one of my patients who had an adverse. It took me 20 minutes to do the entry. I thought I was done. 2 weeks later, I get a thing back. Oh no, you got to do da-da-da. I don't have the time for that. Who would? So the estimate right now is that the over 15,000 deaths and the over 700,000 adverse events that have been reported, you got to multiply times 100 to probably get an accurate number. Honestly, there's nothing coming out of the CDC that's accurate about the deaths from vaccines, and we can talk about that, especially this injection, yes.
So my question
Yeah.
is, oxygen, I see in Walgreens and CVS, they have boost cans of oxygen. Are those effective? in
Oh, good for you to
boosting
have,
oxygen?
I'll tell you what, think outside the box. Having an oxygen supply on hand, if this thing gets out of hand like it did with Delta variant, is not a bad idea. Don't make a run on the places now, but it's probably a whole lot more important than the generator, although you may need the generator to run the oxygen. So you need the generator and the oxygen, that's true. Okay, yes,
And
thanks.
are
good, great.
masks effective at these ones you get out of the box? Are they effective for anything
for the
besides
oxygen, you
making
mean?
you sweat?
For the oxygen mask.
No, just wearing
No,
masks.
no
anyway.
mask. I have not worn a mask since the beginning of COVID, except when I was told I'd get kicked off staff and I decided to wear it, so, no.
I have friends that are ordering ivermectin, liquid or paste, and
Yeah, let's
as
not go
a
there.
vitamin C type of
Yeah,
thing, you know?
let's try not to go with okay, really bad FDA starting talking about dewormers when they know that we've been using ivermectin for human consumption to prevent river blindness for decades and for scabies. But anyway, long story short, there are some veterinarians out there. You had to go to a veterinarian if you're going to talk about ivermectin for animals. And there's some really cool veterinarians in this town, a bunch of them, who know how to take that horse ivermectin and use it for human consumption. But you don't want any physician ever saying anything about that, because that's how we get set up for failure. So that question's off the table. But if you have a veterinarian that wants to work with you, that's fine. All right? Good. Thank you.
Is ivermectin and hydrochloroquine preferred over Regeneron for first time, for early treatment?
Which one is preferred, ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine? Right now, with the Delta variant, we started doing both because they had different mechanisms. Both. But the biggest difference is hydroxychloroquine needs to be used early in the stages, pretty much the same time we're talking monoclonal antibodies, because its biggest feature is to reduce viral replication and uptake into the cells. Whereas ivermectin, I have been able to use later in the stages because of those other slides, like these patients in the hospital. And hey, guess what? Which hospital system do you all think, by show of hands, would be the easiest one for me to get ivermectin? And how many of you think Ocala Regional System? How many of you think Advent Health?
I think either one.
Believe it or not, they both give me grief. They both threaten to kick me out and mess me up. But Advent Health, and maybe it has something to do with the fact that a very important person in this town actually got hospitalized and was treated with ivermectin. And they wouldn't dare not let that happen. And after that, we've been able to get ivermectin. I'm the only one, but at least they're letting me do it. Okay, thank you, sir.
Good evening. Hi, I was not here for your entire lecture, so if this is repetitive, I apologize. I received a religious exemption and am in a position in my job now where they're trying to force testing twice a week. What do you think as a physician?
Let's talk
what's
about
the political
exemptions.
deal
Yeah.
behind that?
I am so glad you talked about exemptions. That's good. We have time too. Hey, so my office, what I'm doing is I have a prescription pad that says medically exempt, and I will not release personal health information based on HIPAA and GINA. And that's all it is, with my signature, and that goes off. And it's a $25 fee to mail it to you anywhere in the country. My daughter, the newly minted doctor, is like, Dad, can't you get in trouble for doing that? I said, I'm not making a diagnosis other than the fact that this is a dangerous genetic engineering injection, and the people who should be getting in trouble are the ones giving it. Now, you talk about religious exemptions. The reality is that these medical students and others they're not accepting medical exemptions. They just are not. So I had a PhD student in Chicago, PhD student. I wrote one medical exemption and another. Finally, I encouraged her. I said, Lauren, just write, due to deeply held religious and personal convictions, I cannot and will not receive this vaccine, if you want to use that. And they accepted that. Now, everybody think about this. What other groups in America are protected because of religious exemptions? What about the Amish? None of their kids get vaccinated. What about Native Americans? What about Christian Scientists? So why can't Catholics, and in fact all Christians, be religiously exempt from getting these new experimental products? It doesn't make sense. So, yeah, use religious exemptions, and I know the lawyers in the country are really rallying against that First Amendment right, or for that First Amendment right.
Does that exemption work, though, for testing, forced testing?
Well, the forced testing, if you have to subject yourself to testing, we actually had to go through it in Puerto Rico when we were down there. We got kicked out of the hotel. We did the rapid one real quick from the over-the-counter. Let me give you a couple of quick pointers. Clean out the nasal pharynx, put a little bit of peroxide, whatever. You if you have to get tested, some places are just going to have to get tested until we can straighten out these religious exemptions. Work on the religious exemptions, but do your best to get the test that's not going to give you the false positives, which is the PCR. You got to go with those store-bought tests and hope they'll accept them. Good questions. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Littell. God bless you. Thank you for all you do. I have a question about the prophylaxis for ivermectin. Is that what you're recommending with the Delta variant to continue with?
It was huge with Delta variant, huge. We actually doubled up. We still did hydroxychloroquine prophylaxis, which was like 200 milligrams, different protocols, but typically twice a week. Ivermectin before the Delta variant was once a week, and it's a milligram per kilogram dosage. So it'd be a typical person your size would be 12 milligrams, 4 3-milligram tablets once a week. But then we doubled that up to twice a week during Delta variant. That was Dr. Corey and FLCC's recommendations, and it's been effective, very effective. And now I didn't take it because I had COVID in February. My natural immunity is good, but for the people who had not had COVID, who do not have natural immunity, the prophylaxis is very effective. Now, here's where the rubber hits the road, or the problem is that the Walgreens, the pharmacies, even Publix came out and started telling us, well, we're not going to let you get it for doctor or Publix. You know, they're not doctors. Well, we're not going to let them get it for prevention, but we'll wait till they're sick. You have to be sick. So, you know, we fight those fights, but it works.
So you recommend continuing prophylaxis,
Okay,
ivermectin?
continuing after Delta variant. I have had that question a lot right now, because knock wood and praise God, we're in a lull, all right? We are in a lull. I would say everyone should be on their vitamin C, D, zinc, quercetin ritual every day. COVID's not going to disappear. COVID would have disappeared if we had been allowing natural immunity to take root in this country and not rolled out the vaccine, which in turn rolled out the Delta variant. It would have disappeared, but it couldn't disappear because there's way too much money to be made on Molnupiravir and these sham vaccines. But anyway, right now we don't need it, but keep it in stock. Have some ivermectin somewhere to use when the next variant comes.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you. God
welcome.
bless.
So let's say, in spite of all the good things somebody can do prophylactically, whatnot, they get COVID and they do decline. If you had to go to a hospital in Florida, not necessarily Ocala, but anywhere in Florida, where would you go?
Now that's a scary question to answer because you know it's a leading question because obviously right now I'm the only doctor in town that's treating anybody with ivermectin in the hospital. There was one intensivist at Ocala Regional that the family begged him to, and he finally did. But they wouldn't get it. So
are you saying that nobody that gets, are you saying that there has not been any patients, whether yours or Corey's or anybody's, who have gotten ivermectin treatment and haven't needed oxygen or additional therapies? So that's what I'm saying. If somebody, even if they do ivermectin or
and
whatever.
they still die. And yes, I have had a half a dozen patients who died in spite of ivermectin.
So where do you go? I mean, if it gets worse, where do you go?
Here, let me say this about the reality of COVID, certainly the reality of Delta variant. I didn't have a single patient die with the Alpha variant. I thought that was pretty good with supposedly 600,000 people die. Actually, there was only one, and he was a wonderful Italian-American gentleman who was stuck in the nursing home. And his daughter called me and said, they brought COVID people into the nursing home here in town, and Dad's getting sick, can you treat? I couldn't treat him, I didn't have the right. She begged and begged, they wouldn't. By the time he got to the hospital, it was too late, and I was with him. That was one of my first patients where I had to sneak a family member up into the COVID unit to be with the 90-year-old dad. I just told the nurses, she's gonna come be with him, I don't care what the policy is, but that happened. So there's so many aspects of hospital care. Number one, I gotta say this, the healing encounter has to involve the family. And the fact that every hospital in America, practically, during COVID, certainly every hospital I went to, denied the patient the right to have family with them. So even you mentioned...
So where are you going? You still haven't... Where
I'm
are you
at
going?
Advent Health and I'm at Ocala, but I've had to do things that I can tell you some of the things I've done. But I've had to literally sneak people into people's rooms. I've had to beg, I've had to talk to respiratory therapists and say, listen, we can wean this guy off of oxygen. I'm not a pulmonologist, but I know this guy can be home. I'm not the infectious disease consultant, but I know remdesivir is dangerous. And I know this guy's going to benefit from ivermectin, but
So it sounds like there's no hospital in Florida that will treat.
It has been a disaster in the hospitals. It has been a disaster, which is why I am so proud of my patients, including one I saw today.
No, I don't understand that.
You know, there's good care in hospitals. There's been heroes in hospitals.
Okay.
There have been true heroes. And guess what? There have been people I've taken care of who've survived their hospitalizations. And many come to, they're wonderful people. I saw one guy, he was on a ventilator for 3 weeks at Ocala Regional. He's now in my office. I never could treat him.
So just one other question.
Go ahead.
Is there any patients, maybe people over 80, that should get vaccinated, or no one? No how?
At this point, I don't endorse this for anybody because of what I've shared with you tonight. I have a handout in my office that says, if you are in a nursing home or someplace where you have no chance of ever getting early treatment, then, and you're over 80, because here's another thing I just said today on a radio show. Older 80, they don't have as much muscle mass up here in the deltoid, so when they get this injection, it's not as likely to spread to their other organs. I mean, their ovaries are not even there anymore, and the testicles are getting it, but it doesn't get there. You take a high testosterone male in his 50s, and you inject it in the deltoid muscle, which is more vascular, it's going to get places much more readily. And you inject it in a Navy SEAL or an elite athlete, you know it's going all over the place. So the point is, you look at the population, and for people over a certain age that have no chance to get early treatment, I did recommend it. So all these are brilliant questions. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And just one last thing to the mask thing with the dentist and the eye doctors. The reason, I'm not saying all doctors, I'm sure there's a majority of them think masks are a good idea, whatever. But a lot of them are asking you to do that because they are trying to prevent litigation. And I would encourage you, I've worked in medicine, my family's worked in medicine. I'm a patient actually at Dr. Littell's, so is my father. I agree, I'm on your side. But to not get medical things for your eyes, for your teeth that could go wrong because you have to wear a mask, you might be cutting off your nose to spite your face.
And I can tell you that.
So I think.
Yes, you're right.
I get your concern.
No, I mean,
but
I have to
think
lie.
that would be a mistake.
Earlier, just so you know, because I didn't lie, but I had in the midst. By the way, your prayers have been answered, because when this was getting really bad for me, I almost lost the vision in this eye. Before August, actually in the beginning of July, I had so much pressure in here that I had to go to Gainesville, and I had to have my eyeball literally put there's a tube up in here to drain the pressure off. And it was not an easy surgery, but had I not had it, and then for a month I couldn't see out of my left eye during most of the worst time of the Delta variant. And I had a lot of other stuff going on. But of course, I wore my mask at Gainesville. But the eye doctor said, I get it, Dr. Littell. He agreed with me. But you see, we got to do what we got to do. I'm seriously going to have to get on this call. But I want to tell you, the Holy Spirit was at work here tonight, because I got through this, and you got to listen, and I got to share, and I appreciate your prayers so much. Thank you. Thank you.
One real quick question as the doctor gets ready to leave. How many people in here that has a family member that has been treated by Dr. Littell or in person?
Wow. Thank you for the opportunity to care for you. That's all I can say. Being a physician for the folks in the back is the greatest privilege of anyone's life. It is. It's a great privilege.
Thank you.
God bless you guys. Take care.
Thank you.
All right,